let me kind of kick this off here. I want to tell everybody watching this that, man, this is probably like the most interesting guy in the world that you probably don't know. There's a couple of things I really want to hit on today. It's just, what does Sunil do, at Fiserv? And so we're talking about, first data prior to the acquisition. That's number one merchant side. So let's talk about core. We got number one selling core. We've got most market share of all, but any core ever in the history of core.
40% market share.
Yeah. Number two selling core. Yep. Number one Fintech selling core. I think Clover is right up there with 78% growth last year. I mean,
some of my experiences, I've been privileged to work with Fiserv not only in the U.S. but in international, and that gives one a very unique perspective because different regions of the world are at different stages of maturity, especially from a fintech perspective, right? A lot of things that we're doing here in the U.S. and what we're seeing are things that are more commonplace in Asia and certain parts of the world. But one of the things that you also kind of appreciate is just the different types of regulatory regimes that are coming up, right? Whether it's obviously Europe is a little bit more ahead in certain areas, and the U.S. is looking at it closely, right, and trying to learn from that. So from that perspective, I think there's an opportunity for us to do more on the fintech side of things to help our institutions kind of appreciate what they really can and should be doing to serve that last mile customer a little bit better, and kind of stop the bleeding or the disintermediation that's going on, because they do have the capability to provide those end-to-end services.
Yep. That's a great point. I think, so that's something I've been kind of looking at. Dad talks a lot about the features of fintech, right? We track all the fintechs, all the sponsor banks, and then the feature set. And we were talking earlier, man, there isn't anything that strikes us. I'm wondering if there's anything that grabs you, but from a feature set perspective, think about things like early direct deposit. I mean, this isn't rocket science. Maybe it's taking existing things and bending them a little bit, but there's not anything in fintech that really freaks us out for a bank, right? It's not a bridge too far in many cases that we've seen.
Yeah, no, I think, Tanner, that's a great point, right? I think you got to give due to the fintechs that they've created brands and they've created user experiences that have kind of captured the imagination of millions of Americans across the country, right? And especially younger Americans that are more digitally native and have a good appreciation for a very nice user experience, right? In terms of, and being able to do lots of transactions in a very efficient way. But those transactions, those features, those products, you're absolutely right. Those are things that are available to all financial institutions. If you look at some of the top fintechs, whether it's Chime or Acorns or Moneylion, there is no feature that they are really supporting that can't be supported by a community institution today. And the reason for that is they all need sponsor banks to do what they're doing. Right? So some sponsor bank is basically making all of the plumbing work behind that user experience. So from my perspective, I think it feeds largely into your point that, that basically in itself proves that there's nothing that they're doing that a financial institution can't do. But all that said, Tanner, and I know you've got a lot of experience on the digital side of things with Malzai and other things, but and I'm sure you appreciate that hurdle though for that UI UX and making that seamless and making that efficient. That's no small task, right? And I think the guys have invested in those areas and are reaping the rewards for that.
Okay, this is that's what I love about this guy, right? So what they do is take that plumbing and interoperability of all of it, and it's transferable. Yep. So they can take that to your bank because they've already got it built. So all of these things, and again, back to what you're talking about.
Okay, that's a good point. Oh, that's a good point. Okay, so something I love on the Fiserv side, when we look at the data, and this is pretty recent for us, man, as we've dug deeper and deeper into things, Fiserv's actually a leader on the sponsor banking side too. Yeah. So this is a little wild, and I think back to your legacy point, right? Fiserv leads with 40% market share on banks, but I don't think most people know Fiserv leads on a lot of top fintechs and a lot of top sponsor banks as well. And so I think that's your point on plumbing. right? And I think Sunil, maybe the question being,
He's the
how
guy
much
behind
is
the scenes.
interoperable, right? Because I think it's
Right.
all sort of single platform, maybe a big statement, but is that a good theme?
Right. Yeah, no, I think you're right there. And yeah, I think we were excited to see a number of our financial institutions kind of open up their business model to be more sponsor bank oriented. And we worked with a lot of those institutions to help them appreciate the flexibility on the core stack that they already had, right? And that's, Dave, back to your point on the plumbing. And I think there's a lot of ways that you can orient the stack to support a number of different business models, right, for the institution. Whether the institution wants to launch a digital branch on their own, whether they want to support a sidecar core and basically launch their own digital bank separately, or whether they want to just work with Fintechs and be the general ledger for them and the regulatory oversight, provider. What we are trying to do, though, is educate more of our institutions on how to become a sponsor bank.
Right.
Because I think in today's world, given, kind of the challenges that they have on their balance sheet, the challenges on net interest margin and everything else, it is a real opportunity for a lot of our institutions to kind of think about, hey, how do I become a sponsor bank, and is the juice worth the squeeze? And what we found, and I think, you guys have been great at working with us on this, is there's a lot of fintechs out there, and they're basically dialing the same banks to get that support. So I think we're hearing that from the fintech community. They'd love to see that list grow. Absolutely. Right. And that's where we'd love to partner with our institutions, because to your point, they've already got the plumbing. They just need to make the business decision and operating model decision on, hey, do we want to do the sponsor bank stuff?
Yep. Yeah, we've seen roughly a double in sponsor banks last year.
I'm going to talk to the bankers out there for a second. What we're really talking about here is there's a handful of institutions that basically are the sponsor banks for almost everybody. And because of this, and we've got just like a wave of fintechs coming into a funnel. So you find specialization. So I'm going to go to this institution for my savings. I'm going to go over here and get my card. I'm going to go over here and do this piece and that piece and putting these things together. And really what we're talking about is an opportunity out there for community banks to become sponsor banks. And so think about Durbin, right? You hit that 10 billion limit.
Yeah.
All of a sudden interchange gets a little funky. So if you focus on the community bank side of this thing and empowering them to be sponsor banks, nobody is an expert at picking the next unicorn. We're pretty good at it, probably as good as anybody out there. Yeah. But that said, you don't have to hit a unicorn to have success. I think like 80% of the interchange that comes through a fintech lands at the sponsor bank. Well, so the sponsor bank is really making a bunch of money. And if you look at all the earnings ratios across the board, boom, tip of the spear, and 1% on every category, it's a fintech bank, a sponsor bank.
And I think to that point, man, look, I think fintech is very anti-big bank. I think community banks have a very similar message, right, of being different. Fintech and sponsor banking is a chance for community banks and fintechs to be on the same team. Right. That's actually really cool, right? And I don't think that's talked about enough.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think, there are, cases of fintechs that are very positioning themselves very publicly as, hey, they're going to be the next neobank, and they're going to be the ones that are going to service the last mile better than traditional banks. And I think there's a handful of those, right? But most of the fintechs that are out there do recognize that, hey, working with an existing financial institution is a great way to give their customers access to some of the great tech that they've developed, but with access to all of the use cases and features and functionalities that banks are already providing today, right? And it's a nice marriage together. And for a lot of the sponsor banks that have done it and done it well, there's this halo effect, right? Because they are working with fintechs and they appreciate the adjacency of what they've got going on, they use that as an opportunity to learn and make themselves better, right? Because they see what the fintechs are doing and they appreciate, like Dave mentioned, like it's not something that is not replicable, right? Or something that they can't do, but it's something that they can learn. So I think it's a great marriage where the fintechs getting what they need, but the sponsor bank is also getting that benefit of that adjacency because they're affiliating themselves with a brand that is, more digitally native, a little bit more forward in terms of their customer segment that they want to go after. So I think there's lots of benefits on both sides. And Dave, as you said, there's benefits obviously on the bottom line, right, for doing something like that.
Yep.
I'm thinking about Rocket Mortgage and Cross River, right? Being a heck of a niche on the mortgage side. And I think to your point, not necessarily trying to be a neobank or be full service or compete with banks, much more niche focused and mortgage only. It's a really good example.
Yeah, there's 25% of the banks out there right now. And I'm not saying don't do mortgages. I'm talking about you can do the full service online. You don't ever have to go in.
Only 25% offered mortgage LOS.
So where did Rocket Mortgage pop up from?
Right.
From the opportunity that was left on the table.
That's
okay.
right.
Now, what does that tell us? Well, maybe you can compete there. Maybe you can't. But maybe you could also sponsor another fintech that can compete with them better.
Well, and there's a case to be made that fintechs, especially Sunil, to your point, in these niches, I think they're almost more like really good marketing companies, right? Or front experience companies.
Yeah, Wade Arnold's the guy who said they're sophisticated business clients.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at them, right? If you're a bank, you look at them as a business client that's very much a marketing shop, right? I think if I'm a banker looking from that perspective, it's a little, it's a little more familiar. It's an easier way to think about it. And I think it's a good point.
Let's take a little different direction here real quick. I kind of beat a little bit, not half as much as I'd like to about that legacy vendor concept.
How are you the number one selling core in your legacy?
Right.
Sorry, I'm done.
And number 2 selling core, number 1 fintech selling core, number 1 on the merchant side. Let's go down the list. And then what they've just done on the mobile front with incorporating the card situation, their self-issuance. I mean, guys,
it's a big ecosystem.
This is an ecosystem.
In terms of where we're going, I think, it's appreciating everything that's happening in the market, right? We too are learning with every passing day of what's happening in the fintech arena, what's happening with financial institutions, and especially what's happening on the regulatory side of things, right? So I think from a Fiserv perspective, we are really focusing and doubling down on kind of unbundling our cores and creating APIs that make it very easy for financial institutions to go out and experiment, like you're saying, Dave, right? Working with different fintechs and understanding and being able to appreciate where is the model going, right? Because nobody really knows exactly where the model's going, but you have a sense of where the puck is going, right? And you can basically then work with fintechs and third parties and kind of experiment and figure out, hey, is this the right model for me, without having to buy, a ton of new tech to support all of that, right? So for us, we know we're on a journey to make access to data that currently resides in the core and application capability that currently resides in the core much more available through open APIs that allow financial institutions some freedom to go out and partner with different companies to try different types of products and services for different segments of customers and see what works and what sticks and what doesn't, right? So that's where we're focused.
That we're talking about here. There's a initiation moment and a perfection moment, and that ground in between is where everybody judges you. And it's like, I can tell you guys from being in the software business all my life, it's ugly, it's messy, making the sausage is tough stuff. But when you get it right, you get it perfected, then it's when we're really there. And everybody, I think, along the way wants to say, well, this API, I did that with such and such company, and that wouldn't look really cool. And it's like, well, give it a while. Take it easy. You don't have to be the first adopter to everything. But as you go, and again, from our side, looking at data and watching the numbers all the time, I mean, it's pretty obvious where you see, hey, these numbers double, or you see these particular sets of groups of institutions are always at the top of this. It's not necessarily the same institution every time, too. There's a broader group that keeps growing. What do they have in common? That's how we find sponsor banks. That's how we find some of this stuff and see what's going on. And that's what leads us to kind of break down the money movement, how things do, back to what you were talking about earlier. The features of fintech are banking features.
Right.
And we've got to
Right.
be able to bring those things to the bankers so that they can make scale, make money without having to do mergers and acquisitions.
One of the
Right.
key things I've seen, and Sunil, I'm sure it's similar for you. I don't love the word culture. It's not my favorite, right? But
You got
I'm
no
talking,
culture, man.
we all know that.
No
No,
culture.
but talking to banks, right? And it's, what's the common denominator of success? And you think about institutions that are very risk averse, right? Or at least great risk managers. That concept comes through a lot of times, and folks are showing up and saying, how can I participate, right? But not be too alarmed if I fail. And we're starting to
Right.
see that right now, right? A lot of people are talking about, can I start maybe doing a niche direct bank, maybe college students or ranchers, right? Something like that. And is that a way that I can begin to implement some new technologies that maybe start limping me towards sponsor bank and things like that, right? I think it's interesting. And I don't know, the mindset to me is something that I've seen a lot of failures, sure, but in the long run, to your point, always successful banks that kind of think that way
Yeah, I've never seen a banker go towards being a sponsor bank
and really fail.
and ever say, well, that was a bad idea. Let's
I
go
mean,
back.
there's some
And
bruises.
here's the catch. Well, what if my fintech that I'm sponsoring here, what if that fintech, he doesn't do well? And I'm like, who gives a shit? Get another one.
Yeah.
Right.
It doesn't, they're like mosquitoes at the beach. They're everywhere. So you don't have to
Yes.
worry about their success. You're enabling them through your banking function. Once that, we'll call it fintech ready. Once you made your bank fintech ready, you're fintech ready for all of them.
Right.
Are you seeing similar with, I don't know, I'm just getting a bunch of questions from bankers that are like, how do I participate? And
Right.
my general sense is just start participating, right? I mean, have a
Yeah.
conversation, start dabbling in small
Very
things and
important
kind of
point.
work
Very
into it.
important point. I really want to give you guys kudos on this. It's been a damned expensive process. You've got regulatory hurdles that are outrageous. You've got a tech gap to fill that's unbelievable.
Mhm.
That's what I think you guys have done such a great job of, is you've lowered that
Lowered that bar.
hurdle to where
Yeah.
I don't need a tech staff. I don't have to
Right.
worry about the regulators coming in. You guys have kind of covered all that in a box for us.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a great point. Look, we kind of consider ourselves to be, one of the best fintechs, if not the best fintech in the world, right? And we're one of those original fintechs out there. And for as long as I can remember, this company was founded on democratizing, technology for community institutions, right? That they could not get access to themselves, right? So it's great, sometimes when you hear all these fintechs talk about that they're unbundling banking and making banking easier for everybody. We believe we've been doing that for decades as well, right? And that goes to your point, Dave, in terms of, if you look at the tech stack that you already have, there is some learning curve to becoming that sponsor bank and understanding kind of what changes on the risk side and the operations side, and how do you need to report on fintech activity a little bit. But you're right, Tanner, there's not a big back end. It's more about kind of perspective and mindset. Willing to get into business, and if you are, please do treat it like a separate business and not like something you're doing off the side of the desk. I think where we see some failures with community institutions that want to dabble on the fintech side, they kind of give it to one of their senior officers to manage off the side of their desk, right? And I think for us, it's more about, hey, let's dedicate some resources and some time and effort and do this the right way. Because I think you're right, Dave. I haven't really come across an institution who's done it the right way and dedicated their resources. They've kind of reaped the rewards, and you don't have to be the one that finds the unicorn, to your point. There's no pressure there. I think you're just basically creating an on-ramp for entrepreneurs to basically test out different business models. But you're the on-ramp, and it's really, really hard for them to find many on-ramps. So there's an opportunity for you to have that type of conversation and get that kind of learning there. So yeah, I agree with everything you guys are saying.
That was awesome. I really like the way you said that. That made a lot of sense.
We've got a couple of minutes left here with you, and I want to first thank you so much for your time. I think that was great. Is there anything that bankers ought to really tune into? I mean, do you have a message or something where you say, hey, there's a message of hope? One of the things that we're concerned about desperately is just banks seem to be destroying each other by mergers and acquisitions. If we get down to a point where we get too few community banks out there, and everybody merges up for scale. Okay, it's going to be this level against the big banks, and that's not going to work either. We need stratification all the way through. And whether it's a $170 million bank or whether it's a $100 billion bank, there's room for everybody. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely do. When I got the role to head up community banking for Fiserv, and I started kind of meeting customers all across the country, Dave, and walking into branches, learning about what they do for their communities, learning about what they mean for their communities, learning about the safety net that they provide. The pandemic really, hit everybody hard, right? But, for me, the community banks really showed who they were at that time, right? And if you look at the number of PPP loans that they sponsored and how many, I've got conversation upon conversation of how many small businesses woke up and realized that the big nationals weren't there taking their call when they needed a loan extension. And they had to walk down to the local community institution. And guess what? They were open for business and they got their loan and they weren't put in a line, right? Whether they did it digitally, whether they did it manually, they did it, right? And, we should all be grateful for that. And the other thing I would say for community institutions is that, the threat that I see that's real today is more on kind of, now that you've basically gone to the mat for small businesses on Main Street, don't lose that, right? I would tell you that we're here, especially at Fiserv, to help you kind of build that moat around it. There are fintechs coming for that business, and they're coming hard. And those businesses now represent a great deal of core deposit value as well as fee income for a lot of community institutions around the country. And, all of that work that community institutions did to help Main Street survive through the pandemic, now it's time to kind of double down and help Main Street really thrive. And I think the only institution in the country that can really do that are community institutions. So that's where, I think from a Fiserv perspective and me personally, I think there's going to be a lot more that you'll see come out from us to have that dialogue with community institutions and provide them with the tools that they need to kind of, build that moat around Main Street and keep that within the community.
Yeah, keeping small businesses just a mainstay for sure for community banks.
That was outstanding, by the way.
Yeah.
I agree with absolutely every word you said, man. I couldn't have said it better.
Let me say something.
That was perfect.
Can you believe he went into a bunch of branches of community banks just to learn and see what's up? I mean, I wish more people had that attitude and rather than tell everybody everything, is let's go learn something.
Well, I mean, they really stand up for everybody. And when you spend enough years, right, traveling around and seeing them all, you just can't help but it's just such a different thing, right, than we have anywhere else in the country or within business. They're just a different thing. And I have a lot of respect for it.
Yeah. One other message for community banks out there, I think, is that, the FinTech folks, they're really putting the Watusi on the big banks. They're not really coming after you.
But they are after small business, to Sunil's point. So watch out there.
Protecting yourself on that front is important, and there isn't a better way to do it than embrace FinTech.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that, Dave, to your point, and Tanner, right, it's sometimes a little bit difficult to club all fintechs together into one bundle, right? There are fintechs, like you said, that, are really looking to disintermediate, but there's so many more out there that are just worthy partners that are looking for that on-ramp that we talked about so they could test out and build services to a market segment that may not be profitable for big banks or any bank to go after, right? So they're also just trying to serve a need, whether it's in the underserved, underbanked segment, whether it's the immigration population, whether it's, some other, demographic or cohort that has been underserved historically, right? So, and that's where I think there's a lot of commonality with community institutions, because that's what community institutions were always built around, right? Was to go and help those that are not able to get those formal services from the bigger banks.
I think that a mixture there, we put it together really in a clean package, right? It's that, look, if I'm a community bank, I need to make more money, right? And I want to look for new business lines. It's almost like become the on-ramp, right? For the fintechs or the marketing companies, and let them go find it for you.
Right.
Really interesting way to look at it. I love the perspective.
Yeah, let me kind of plug something we're doing, is coming up with a new way for bankers to get together. And so we're hoping that in that process, we can show them and enlighten them on multiple different ways to make money without having to sell your bank. I believe your bank charter is the most important thing you have.
Most valuable.
Yeah.
And what your job, our job is to unveil that, so that here's an opportunity, here's an opportunity, here's an opportunity, right? And we're working hard.
Yeah, no, I think Dave, you hit on something. Very few community institutions, I think, recognize that there is a path to monetizing that charter outside of M&A. And if you think about becoming, and it's not a guarantee, but if you think about becoming a sponsor bank and opening yourselves up to fintechs, right? And as those fintechs grow larger, a lot of those fintechs want to then basically expand their portfolio to more banking-like services, right? And then again, that could present a different type of opportunity to monetize the charter for someone that owns a community bank versus just doing the M&A. And that still keeps everything within that community intact, right? But that's, you're right, Dave, like over the last month, I've talked to 2 or 3 of our financial institutions that got new investors. And those new investors came from fintechs and from non-bank entities that were looking for an on-ramp for more services and capabilities. So I think those monetization opportunities outside of M&A, I think, are there. And fintech is one avenue that's worth exploring for that.
Fantastic. Hey, Sunil, I'm so grateful. Appreciate you riding with the FinTech Cowboys today. And
that was great, man.
Man, keep up the good work on what you guys are doing. And
yeah,
thanks, guys.
Thanks.
I appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much, and really appreciate being part of this thing. So thank you.